All right, I am going to be recording this meeting, so you should see a notification about that. And I just want to start by introducing myself and welcoming you to our IEP webinar tonight to learn more about the IEP. I am Melissa Winchell. I am a professor of education at Bridgewater State University, but more importantly for our purposes this evening, I'm a mom to 3 kids with special needs, all of whom have been supported by IEPs or 504s. And I'm also the founder of Inclusion Matters, which is the West Bridgewater CPAC, Special Education Parent Advisory Council. So as part of our work, we are involved in hosting webinars like this one to provide educational opportunities for other families like ours who also have children with special needs. And if you are not on our email list and you'd like to join, I'm going to post in the chat how you can reach us and join our email list or find out more about us. We're hosting tonight's webinar with our partner CPAC in the East Bridgewater Public Schools. So I want to just take a moment and allow the chairperson for the East Bridgewater CPAC, or at least the person of contact. I don't know if you have an official title, Chris. You should give yourself one while you while you're here, and nobody can argue. So let me introduce Christy Andrews and let her say hello to you as well.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Christy Andrews, and like Melissa said, we do not have a chair yet for our East Bridgewater CPAC. This year in East Bridgewater, we're really working on building the relationship and rebuilding what we once had. Similar to Melissa, I am a parent of a special needs child. I am also a teacher for Brockton Public Schools. I'm excited to be here tonight, and I thank Melissa for welcoming us from East Bridgewater and kind of helping us guide us along this path as we continue to grow our CPAC. So thank you.
Thanks, Christy. And the East Bridgewater CPAC has a private Facebook group. I've posted the link. If you live in East Bridgewater and want to connect with other families with special needs, please do. The link is in the chat for you to join their private group. So our webinar is being recorded, and we will email the recording to those on our email list. So again, you can look in the chat for information about how to join our email list. I just want to review a couple housekeeping things, and then I'll introduce our guest speaker for tonight. So we have muted all mics for tonight, and you'll see that you don't currently have an option to unmute. That's by design, just to make sure that our guest speaker can get through their content so that everyone has an opportunity to hear what our speaker has to say. However, we would love to hear your questions, so please post your questions in the chat, and I will keep track of them as we go, and we'll make sure to leave some time for questions at the end of our time tonight. I'll unmute and ask the questions that you posted throughout the evening in the chat. That said, if you don't want people to see your question, you only want me to see it, feel free to private message me in the chat. You can do that as well. You don't have to chat to everyone. You can just chat to me. So just know that that's an option for you. The only last housekeeping thing I will say is we are going to ask tonight that you complete our online sign-in sheet. Once a year, the State Department of Education, DESE, asks that CPACs like ours and like the East Bridgewater CPAC take attendance at one of their meetings, just to show that we are working with our school districts to provide support to families like you. And so I'm posting in the chat now a link to a really quick Google form. If you wouldn't mind just signing in, just to say that you were here. You don't have to leave us any contact information. That's really up to you. But just knowing that you're here is very, very helpful to us. So thank you so much for taking the time to sign in, and I'll continue to post that throughout the evening tonight. So thank you for doing that. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker. I'm really excited to introduce to you Dr. J. Edward Carter, a colleague of mine at Bridgewater State University. Those of us who have had the opportunity to work with Dr. Carter, and I can see, Dr. Carter, you have some students who are now special educators in our Zoom with us tonight. That is evidence of how beloved Dr. Carter is at Bridgewater State. All of us who work with him consider him to be a supportive and encouraging voice in special education. And I think you're going to leave really encouraged tonight, just hearing what he has to say and learning from his expertise. Dr. Carter is an associate professor, and he's also the chairperson for the Department of Special Ed at Bridgewater State. Prior to joining the faculty in 2010, Dr. Carter served as a special ed teacher, related services provider, and a special education administrator for 29 years. His specialties include program and curricula design for students with severe disabilities, transition planning and programming, conducting action research with teachers and administrators, and special education program administration. He is also a parent of 2 adult children, and both were supported with IEPs and 504 plans during their elementary, middle, and high school years. In addition, Dr. Carter has participated in 6 BSEA hearings, and he has hosted an annual 2-day conference on legal issues in special education for the past 10 years. So Dr. Carter, thank you so much for being with us. We're really excited to learn from and with you tonight.
Hi, everyone. Melissa asked if I'd be interested in talking with parents about the new IEP that is emerging under the weeds, if you will. And it was like, oh, well, maybe we should talk about the IEP as it exists now. And when the DESE, gets to it, we'll deal with the new IEP. And it was like, okay, that sounds good too. So I always prefer and enjoy speaking with parents. I am no more knowledgeable than many people in the room. I am old, so I have a lot of experience, and that experience serves me relatively well. So just understand that I don't come here thinking that I have pearls of wisdom to offer people. I have my own experience, and I think I have a pretty good handle on the law, and hopefully we will have a joint understanding of the joint responsibilities for the IEP. So when I talk about that, I mean school districts have a responsibility and parents have a responsibility, and we're legal partners in the process. So we're going to go through the IEP document, but this should be about you and your needs. So I would encourage you to post your questions with Melissa in the chat. She's filtering that out, and she's going to interrupt me with anything that might be of any urgency or requires clarification, or if I'm going too fast or I'm going too slow, anything like that. If you can't tell already, I like to think of myself as relatively informal. And the last thing I like to be called is Dr. Carter, and I think my students would attest to that. For what that's worth. Are there any, and I mean, we have a relatively small group, are there things that we want to make sure we hit, that before tonight's over, can we please make sure we address something like this? Is there anything of that kind of urgency? If there is, please put that in the chat so Melissa can make sure to let me know, and we'll deal with that. Does that make sense to everybody? All right, if it's okay, I'm going to share my screen. We're going to walk through the IEP document as a blank document. I'll give you my thoughts about the partnership involved in each of the 8 template pages. Maybe some, I always talk to my students about there's what the law expects, and then there's Ed's opinion. And I'll always be very clear about when it's the law that requires X, Y, Z, and when it's my opinion, so that there's a distinction between the two. So if there's nothing of immediate concern, I will share my screen. Are we good, Melissa? Okay. Pardon the logistics as I kind of grow this out a little bit here like this. Okay. Hopefully you can see each other and you can see the document, and I have this big screen at home, so I often forget that people are using like small iPads and small screens. So hopefully this is big enough and you can see the template. So on my screen, the template is on the right and our faces are on the template's on the left and our faces are on the right. So that's what I'm seeing. Is everyone else seeing the template? Give me a thumbs up if you see the template. Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right, so page one is really, I consider it like a cover sheet to the rest of the document. And parental concerns is the very first thing that an IEP team is supposed to deal with. And before you even deal with the fact that we're talking about this document, this is a team process. No individual controls the IEP. But by law, there are certain members that are supposed to be part of the team. You're supposed to have an administrator who understands the services in the district. You're supposed to have a teacher who specializes in the particular special needs area that the student for the IEP team meeting is about. Obviously, the parents are legal partners in the process. Anyone who performed an evaluation or has an evaluation report that they need to communicate or transcribe for the team is supposed to be present. And among the district and the parents, you can also invite others. The meeting is about the child. It's not about the parent. It's not about the district. So it's not about what the district is offering, and it's not about what the parent wants. It's about what the child needs. And child needs are supposed to come from evaluation information. So if you think of the overarching process, it starts with identifying a child's needs, usually through evaluation procedures. Then we developed a program, and this 8-page template is supposed to be a document representing the program. IEP stands for Individualized Educational Program, not plan. They purposely changed that language because the legislators wanted us to remember this is about services, not about a piece of paper. So the paper is supposed to communicate the services. That's the point. So once we have the program, then we determine placement. You don't write the program based on a predetermined placement. The law says that we figure out the needs, we design the program, and then we figure out placement. And all of those stages of the process require parental consent every step of the way. Why? Because the law says we're partners. You're equal partners with the district, right? So parents and districts are co-partners in this process, including the evaluations, including the development of the IEP, and including the placement. So if you think of this as the middle part of a 3-part process, that's one way of thinking about it. So page 1, the template of page 1 is really designed to give the team like an overview of kind of the big issues that might be involved. And parental concerns or student concerns, if the student is 18 or older and he or she is her own guardian, then it's the student who has to sign off. It's not the parent. The parent is there to act on behalf of the student. So until they become their own guardian, the parent, speaks on behalf of a student. And then once someone turns 18 and they become of legal age, a student can invite their parents to ask for their assistance, but the student becomes their own legal entity at that point in time. So the parent and the student, whichever or both, you express your concerns. And this is really supposed to be kind of an unedited version of whatever the parental concerns are.
Dr. Carter,
I tell you as a school, go ahead.
Can you make your IEP screen fill your whole screen so we can see it a little bit bigger?
I can try. How does that?
That is better. Yep. Are you able to zoom in?
Yeah,
zoom
but
in
now
more?
I've got to shrink you guys. Hang on a second.
Yeah, and it doesn't, if you can't see us, that's okay. We can see you just fine.
Can you see the page better now?
Yeah, I don't know if you can zoom in at all. Yeah, that
Is
is,
that
oh,
better?
that is way better. Thank you so much.
No, no problem.
Sorry to interrupt.
I'm
Thank you.
trying to keep one page per screen. That's what I was trying to do, but this is better. This is bigger. Is this better for everyone? Okay, okay. So parental and student concerns is an unedited version of whatever might concern the parent or student. And frankly, this is an administrator's nightmare because the last thing you want as a school district is to get surprised at the team meeting. So if I'm a school and I've done a good job, I already have ongoing communication with the parent, and I'm not surprised with something at the team meeting. And now we're scrambling to try and deal with a concern that is unexpected. Many districts send out surveys or send out ways of getting information about parental concerns prior to the meeting so that they can draft an IEP. Well, I should talk about that. So some of you have participated in meetings where you're starting with a totally blank slate, and maybe there's almost like a stenographer or a note taker for the meeting, and they go through the process and take notes. Others of you may have been provided with a draft IEP. And the purpose of providing a draft IEP is so that the meeting can be a little more efficient and move along a little more quickly, especially if the student is complicated or there are issues. What you have to understand is if a district provides you with a draft IEP, it is totally that. It is only a draft, and you are not to be intimidated or to feel like you can't add to the document because it's all typed up and pretty. That's not the intent of a draft. The draft is really to make the meeting more efficient, to have everyone be reading the same thing and reacting to the same thing, not to keep a parent from having input as to what the document should be. In fact, that's illegal. So that's why districts are very careful that if they do provide a sample IEP, that usually they're very careful about putting draft all over it so that you realize that this is just a draft and you have every right to change or have input on any part of the document as you go through the team meeting. Does that make sense to everybody? So depending on your district, you may be working off a draft that's filled in, or you may be, filling in these sections of the IEP along the way. It all depends on the way your district operates. So parental concerns basically states in an unedited way any concerns that the parent might have. Student strengths and key evaluation results. It's a thumbnail sketch of the profile of the child that builds especially off of their strengths. So it's obviously our children are not on IEPs if they don't have challenges. If they don't have a disability and don't need support in order to make adequate progress, then they don't need an IEP. They're not eligible for special ed. So you're having this meeting because I have a disability and because I need support in this area and this area. But what the legislature back in 2004, when a lot of this got solidified, they wanted to make sure that teams built off of students' strengths. And it wasn't just about talking about what someone couldn't do. The evaluation reports go through that, in some cases ad nauseum. But this part of the IEP is really supposed to be a thumbnail sketch of the profile of the child that emphasizes their strengths. And the evaluation results, it's key evaluation results, not the evaluation results for the last 10 years. So this is a fairly skillful section of the IEP that's difficult to write, and often it's a collection of a lot of different information, but synthesized in a fairly abridged paragraph or quarter to half page type of summary. So, and then the last part of page 1 is the vision statement. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what the vision statement is. You're not legally accountable for achieving the vision any more than you're legally accountable for solving a parent's concerns. What you are legally accountable for is making sure that the rest of the IEP document deals with parental concerns and the vision statement. So the vision statement is intended to be an unmeasurable hope and dream for the child. And what's unique about Massachusetts is we have a vision statement for every age child. If you have a kindergarten kid, you're supposed to have a vision. Well, if you go to any other state, there are no vision statements except when you're 14 to 16 years old, because this came about when we passed transition law. But in Massachusetts, any state can up the ante over federal law. And in our state, it was decided that we should have a vision for every child. So if I'm a kindergartner, my vision might be that I want to be fully included in first grade, or I want to have more social connections with my age-appropriate peers, things like that. Achieving that vision should be part of the rest of the IEP, but you're not legally accountable for achieving the vision statement as it's written on the IEP. So, Melissa, I'm wondering, do we want to see if people have questions about each page or section of the IEP, or wait till the end?
We don't yet have any questions on this page. The only question we've gotten so far is about goals, but we'll get to that when you get to
All right. I'll get to
yeah,
that
if people
quickly.
have questions, post them.
I'll move more quickly. So page 2 and page 3 are referred to as PLEP A and PLEP B. PLEP comes from present level of educational performance. No one ever says that. It's PLEP A. If you want to understand what the goals, categories need to be for the curriculum frameworks, that's what PLEP A is about. So PLEP A is exclusively if a child's disability is impacting their ability to make adequate progress in the curriculum frameworks. It's just about the academic content areas. That's the intent of PLEP A. So if the disability is affecting progress, you have to say how. That's what so you click off whatever areas are impacted, and then you say how the disability is impacting making adequate progress in the areas that you've clicked off. Sometimes that's a general thing, like someone has organizational skill issues that affect all curriculum areas the same way. And it might be one paragraph that addresses all the curriculum areas. In other cases, my issues with ELA may be very different than my issues in math. So, this is a kid by kid type of thing where you have to describe how the disability impacts progress on a kid by kid basis. Once you've defined how progress is being impeded, now you have to identify any accommodations or any modifications that might be required in order to make adequate progress in the frameworks. So for PLEP A, we're only talking about accommodations necessary for academic content areas or modifications necessary for academic content areas. If your son or daughter is pulling A's, B's, and C's in the curriculum frameworks, this page may be blank. Maybe your son or daughter is having major behavioral or social issues, and it's not affecting them academically, but it's affecting them in a whole bunch of other ways. This page could be totally blank. For people who are more severely challenged, they often have a lot of issues with PLEP A and a lot of issues with PLEP B. Okay, well, what's PLEP B about? PLEP B is intended to be anything else other than academic content areas. So when they designed this part of the template, there was a debate between the advocacy community and the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. The department wanted to leave the categories blank and have each team decide what the other educational needs would be kid by kid. But the advocacy community said, wait a minute, parents have no idea what the possibilities could be. You can't leave it blank. Now you're essentially at the mercy of being educated enough to know what the possibilities could be. So the compromise was, okay, so we'll give some examples of what other educational needs could be, but we're still going to leave an other slot so the teams could identify an area. Again, this is about the needs of the child, not the program that he or she may be attending or going to. So based on a student's needs, if he or she has social issues, behavioral issues, if they're more severely involved and have travel training issues or need assistive technology, those are typical examples of things that might be checked off under PLEP B. Now, once I check off an area, now I have to say how the disability is affecting each of the areas that I've checked off. So I might have a sentence or two that says the disability is impacting the ability to socialize with age-appropriate peers like this. And it's affecting the student's ability to independently travel in the building or in his or her community like this. So other is very, it's really a theoretical place where you can include anything that is relevant to that individual child's needs. And these are typical categories, but it's not like I'm a better parent if I have more PLEP B checked off. That's not the intent here. It should really be about zeroing in specifically on the needs of the individual child. So you describe how the disability affects progress in the other areas, and then again, you define accommodations and modifications that will help. Now, a lot of people don't understand the distinction between accommodations and modifications. Accommodations, think of it as accessing the same expectations, whether it's curriculum under PLEP A or social skills under PLEP B. What are the same expectations of my age-appropriate peers? And does it allow me to keep those expectations, but provide them in a different way? Accommodations give you another route to the same expectations. Modifications significantly alter expectations, whether it's academic or social. There's an expectation that because the student is significantly behind their age-appropriate peers, accommodations don't cut it. I actually need to modify the academic, my reading level. Say I'm a fourth grader, but I'm reading at a pre-K level. Well, the content that I'm provided needs to be provided at my reading level. That's a content modification. If I have a kid who's labeled with autism and the primary methodology being used to provide instruction is discrete trials, that's a methodological modification. And if the expectations of the student is that he or she is only going to do half of the work that his or her, age-appropriate peers, that's a criterion modification. So on PLEP A and PLEP B, you have opportunities to identify accommodations that help you access the same expectations or modifications that define significant changes in expectations. And a lot of people struggle with that. And there's a lot of gray area in between accommodations and modifications. In my book, I don't really care which category they're in, as long as all the needs of the child are included somewhere in these two boxes. That's what really matters. This document is really about communicating what the services and what the program should look like. Don't get all hung up about having stuff in the right box. Think of it as a total service delivery plan. And as long as it's stated so that everyone understands, that's really what matters. So far, we've looked at page 1 that gives an overview. And then page 2 and 3 are about the curriculum frameworks or academic content areas, PLEP A, or literally anything else under PLEP B. Now, anything I identify in PLEP A and PLEP B, any categories that I identify, normally you would have a goal for each of those areas that I've identified. So if I identify organizational skills as a PLEP B, category, now I'm going to have a goal for organizational skills. If I identified ELA as a content area that the disability is impacting, progress, now I'm going to have a goal in ELA. So if I've clicked off, 3 areas, generally speaking, I'm going to have 3 goals. If I've clicked off 8 areas, generally speaking, I'm going to have 8 goals. So it all depends. The other thing is for everything I'm saying, there's an exception. This is an individual right. So we're trying to talk about this in general terms, even though each program is designed around the individual. So if you need to make, an adaptation to the template in order to describe what the services should be, well, then you do that as a team, and that's totally okay. So now let's say we have, 2 or 3 areas checked off in PLEP A and PLEP B. Now I'm going to have 3 goal pages. My goal pages include 3 things, generally speaking. So besides identifying the category, obviously you start with that. Now I have to say, what is the current performance in that goal area right now? So as of the team meeting, what can the kid actually do? And this should be a short paragraph that tells the team, based on where he or she is at right now, this is what Timmy can do in ELA now. This is what Timmy can do behaviorally now. This is what Timmy can do relative to mathematics now. And it should be enough of a paragraph that explains what the kid can do or not do well enough so that you should be able to develop the goal whether you know this kid or not, just by reading this section of the goal page. So I always tell my students, when you're writing or participating in a team meeting, you should write it as if the kid is moving to Iowa tomorrow. And if the teachers in Iowa receive this IEP, would they have a clue what to do? Or are you writing with so much jargon in such unmeasurable or unobservable terms that the teacher has no idea what to do? That's not the spirit of the law. That's not what's intended by this document. I should be able to move to Iowa tomorrow, and the teachers in Iowa would be giving me exactly the same services that we defined in Massachusetts. Because it's about the child, not about the program, not about where you are. Does that make sense to everybody?
And we've got it. Can I ask you a couple questions here?
Sure.
In the chat? Is this a good time?
Sure.
Okay. So one question that we're getting, which I've responded to a little bit in the chat, but I know this is always such a big we could talk about this for a long time. The question is, can you elaborate on the need to secure more than an entry point for students? So in other words, this person said their understanding is that educators need to make sure they are providing more than an access or entry to the curriculum, and that students are getting more than just access to something. What do you know about that? Like, what is the
So
law
entry and
say?
access points are specific references to MCAS alt. So it's presumed that the student is severely challenged to begin with, because you wouldn't be talking about entry or access points to begin with. You'd be talking about the curriculum frameworks as they are. So if I have a child who's moderately involved or within 2 grade levels of their age-appropriate peers, I'm not talking about entry or access points. Those are terms that are specific to the curriculum frameworks, and someone who is significantly below, at least 2 grade levels below their academic peers. And as such, usually you're talking about much more extreme cases where you might have, for example, a 5th grader who's functioning at an 18-month developmental level. So his or her age-appropriate peers are other 11, 12-year-olds, but my goals need to be at a point where I'm not doing the 8th grade learning outcomes from the curriculum frameworks. I'm trying to use access points or entry points to those curriculum frameworks that expose me to my age appropriate frameworks, but give me goals and curriculum that is at my developmental level. So it's a tricky balance. And this is where the skill of many teachers who are licensed in severe is really challenged, because often they're the ones who are crafting the goals in ways that challenge the student and have high expectations, while at the same time is at an achievable level within typically a calendar year, or the period in which the IEP is being written for. So most of these documents are expected to function for a calendar year. So when you write a goal, you're writing it assuming that given a year's instruction, not just any instruction, the specialized instruction that I'm getting as defined in the IEP, after a year's instruction, this is the outcome I should be able to achieve. That's what a good goal does. So if it's a socialization goal, you're making your best guesstimate as to how much progress I can make in a year. And this is what we're going to see. A good measurable goal defines an outcome that doesn't require you to get a dictionary to figure out what the goal means. It should be a very observable statement that a parent can measure just as much as a teacher could measure, because it's written in a way that defines things in ways that we can see or hear and write down. So no one should have any misunderstandings about what the outcome looks like at the end of a year. And if you don't know what the goal statement means, you should ask people to explain it. You should ask, if it's not written observably enough so that you can't visualize what the student will be able to do in a year, you need to just ask for clarification. And if the language can be adjusted so that it can be more measurable or more viewable. I always think of it as, so if you write a goal and 2 different people were reading the goal, do they have the same video in their head about what they'd be measuring? Or are 2 different people interpreting those words totally differently? The more ambiguity or the more interpretations of those words, the less compatible with the intent of a measurable goal. The intent is that I don't need a degree to figure out what the outcome is going to be. So I may need many parents can contribute to and help in the writing of goals, particularly in terms of priorities. I mean, a lot of severely involved students, they could have 15 goals, 20 goals. I mean, they're bottomless pits in every direction, right? But you don't have time to work on 20 goals in 1 year. You have to pick priorities that you want to focus on in a given point in time. Now, if someone is more mildly involved, you don't have that same angst about choosing, what I need to work on. It may be that there are 2 or 3 things that are priorities, and those are all very achievable within a given calendar year. So again, depending on the child, what his or her needs are, that's what should be the primary impetus for what the outcomes would be. And again, my outcome is my best guess of a year's progress, given that I'm providing a year's worth of specialized instruction. It should always be a high expectation as much as possible, but it also is a legally binding contract that says we're going to achieve this goal in a calendar year. So that's always kind of a tricky balance. How do I write a goal that is achievable, but has high expectations at the same time? And that's not always easy for teams to do. Does that make sense? Are there any teachers in the room scrambling with that one?
I had a follow-up question to that. So if the student is not severe,
Yeah.
How do we know that they're making enough progress, right? That the teachers aren't just like, giving them access, quote unquote, but how do we know our student, our kiddo is making enough progress? We use the goal. Can you
So
just
for every time the kids get report cards, you're supposed to get an update on each goal. It's supposed to be a narrative report that defines progress on the goal. So I think what you're really asking is, how do you know if the goal is high enough or if the expectation is high enough? I would tell you that if you don't think it is, you should express that and see if the goal can be tweaked in a way that feels more comfortable. Now, these are opinions, and your expectations as a parent might be different than the expectations of an educator. And that can go both ways. Sometimes an educator has higher expectations than a parent, and that's why it's a team process, right? No one person gets to decide. So when there's disagreement or, you can't get to consensus, essentially it's a majority rule type of situation. Whatever the majority of the team thinks is the best goal, that's what would be at least initially put on the IEP. Now, parents always have a safety valve on page 8, right? We haven't gotten to that, but you don't have to sign off on the IEP. You can participate in a team meeting, agree to everything, and then when you receive the final IEP 2, 3, 4 days later, you have every legal right to reject everything or part of it. So we'll get to that when we get to page 8, but you have multiple takes at making sure the goals are expecting enough of your child or not overshooting what your expectations might be. I wish I could give you a simple answer to that one, but there's not. You have to trust that the team knows the child, and you have to trust that the parent knows the child, and that together you can get to something that makes sense for both sides.
One more specific goal question, Ed. Do all benchmark goals need to be at least 80% or more?
If any of my students are in the room, they'll know that I don't allow them to write a goal with a percent. I mean, see, my attitude was always, look, if you're teaching to 80% correct, that means you're teaching to 20% wrong. So why aren't we writing goals to 100%? And so whether you achieve 100%, that's a different story. but shouldn't my target be 100%? Maybe I need to modify the goal down a little bit so that I get it all the time. Otherwise, I'm building off of 20% wrong, 20% wrong, 20%. Now, the flip side of that is the new IEP, they've got percent of accuracy built right into the template. So this is Ed's opinion. Ed's opinion is criteria that says 80% accuracy doesn't tell me anything because two different people could determine what's accurate differently. So how do I know the teacher in Iowa or the new teacher who just got hired is interpreting accuracy the same way as what was intended by the team? So I have a bias about that, but the reality is 90% of IEPs define criteria based on percentage of accuracy or percentage of, 4 out of 5 attempts, 4 out of 5 trials, 80% of the time, 80% accurate. That's very common language. Legally, it fits. It's an acceptable legal standard. It's not an ed standard. So when I teach my students the IEP, they don't get to use percent. Then when they go to their districts, they have to work with each team and figure out what the best goal will be. And if you offer a criterion that doesn't include percent and the team likes that and agrees that that's more measurable, great. If somebody says, we need percent and they convince the team that that's what's then that's what it'll be. It's a team process, one kid at a time. There's no standard. Make sense?
Thanks, Ed. Maybe just one more question about goals, and then I'm going to save the other questions for later because some of them I think are very child specific. So if we have time, we'll get to them, but I want to make sure everybody gets to hear all the general information. But there was a good question here. The question was, what does a SMART goal look like? So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about how we as parents can know if we're reading a well-formed goal. I don't know if they mean SMART, the acronym, or just like a good goal, but either way.
So a good goal, in Ed's opinion, I can see what the statement means. So in other words, the words are not ambiguous. It should be one sentence that defines an outcome that you will see a child able to perform, under, ideal conditions, meaning that they've been taught the way you intended to teach them, and you got the most progress that you best estimated from that child. And if all this happens the way I want, this is what I would see at the end of a calendar year. If you can't see it based on the words that are written, I would suggest that you can't measure it. If you can't measure it, it's not a good goal. So to me, it's all about the picture that the words provide of the outcome that the child will be performing. So if the words are ambiguous or the words don't tell me what I'm going to be able to see at the end of a year, then I would want to go back and rewrite the goal in a way that is written in what my students hate me saying, written in observable terms, right? So if I'm writing a good goal, I'm using words that are observable. And if I can observe it, I can measure it. If I can measure it, it's a good goal, legally. However, the reality is almost every goal you see has some percentage, usually somewhere between 75% and 90% accuracy. So, whatever the rest of the sentence is would be really important if my criterion is a percent. Other thoughts? All right, legally, if someone is, quote, moderately involved, you're not required by law to have goals, objectives, or benchmarks that divide up the goal into measurable parts. If someone is severely involved, now you're legally required in Massachusetts to provide benchmarks or objectives. Those are essentially dividing up the goal into pieces. I teach no more than 3 benchmarks or objectives, because essentially you're reporting on progress toward the goal either 2, 3, or 4 times a year, depending on how often kids get report cards. So the intent of benchmarks and objectives is to divide up the goal into measurable sections that would be first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, meeting the goal. So I would say the most common convention is that for every goal, there are 2 or 3 objectives or benchmarks that break down the goal into subparts. So sometimes they're written more effectively, more observably than the goal. So the goal may be this vague general statement, but then I look at the objectives and they're very concrete and very observable. So in a perfect world, they're both observable. They're both written in terms that you can see the outcome. But again, it's tricky language. So you have a current performance that tells the person what they can currently do in that category. You have an annual goal that says what the student will achieve in a calendar year if I provide all the instruction they're supposed to get. And in many cases, I have benchmarks or objectives that divide the goal up into subparts that I'm going to measure progress. So I would have one of these sections for each category that I check off in PLEP A and PLEP B. And to me, this is the heart of the contract. This is what you're legally accountable for providing. Make sense? Can we move on? All right. This is the service delivery grid. It's probably the most complicated page on the IEP. It's also the most comprehensive in terms of defining services. So it's a little complicated, and now districts, they get Medicaid reimbursement based on how they fill this page out. So it becomes very important financially to school districts. So often how they frame services here has partly to do with how they need to frame it so that they get the reimbursement from Medicaid that they're owed. So the essence of the service delivery page is to identify all of the special ed services that a student will receive, what the service is, what the type of personnel is that will be delivering the service, not who, but the type, the category of service. You don't, as parents, we don't get to say, this is the person, the teacher I want teaching my child. You don't have that right. What you have a right to is saying the type of personnel should be a teacher licensed in moderate 512, or a teacher licensed in as teacher of the deaf, or a speech and language pathologist who has their C's, or blah, blah, blah. So you have a right to qualify the credentials of the personnel, but you don't have a right to identify who the people actually are. So you identify the service, the personnel, how often you receive the services, and for how long. And that's all depending on the cycle that the schedule is based under. Most cycles are a 5-day week. So if I get speech and language services from a speech and language pathologist for half an hour twice a week, if my cycle is a 5-day cycle, that means I get those services within that cycle. If I'm on a 10-day cycle, that means I'm getting 2 times 30 minutes every 2 weeks now. So what you check off as the school district cycle is very important. Most people use a 5-day cycle just so that it's a consistent. So if I'm in a high school and we have A day and B day, right? And it goes back and forth, A day, B day, A, B day, or I have A through F days, right? So now I have a 7-day cycle or a 6-day cycle. That changes my service delivery. So what a lot of people do is they base the service delivery on a 5-day cycle, meaning per week, this is the service that you receive. So grid A, what you see at the top, is only talking about people, professionals who provide consultation to other professionals or to parents. So this has nothing to do with direct services to a child. It's only about, adults talking to adults. That's what grid A is all about. Grid B, when you see below special ed and related services in general ed, these are any services that the child receives directly if they are in a gen ed classroom, grade 4, grade 5, grade 10. And then grid C is any service that is provided if you take a student out of the gen ed classroom. So if I'm in a self-contained program, so all of my services are provided in a self-contained classroom and I'm never in gen ed, all of my services would be listed under grid C. Whereas if I'm fully included in grade 4, and the speech and language pathologist comes into grade 4 to provide support while I'm in ELA, all those services are in grid B. So sometimes you'll see combinations of services listed under A, B, and C, depending on the needs of the child. The more complex, the more needy, the more time the person receives specialized instruction or related services, the more this page has to be filled out. So if I'm in a private residential school, for example, I'm going to have everything the child receives all week long under grid C. But if I'm a kid with executive functioning challenges and I have a special educator consulting my content area teachers, I could have just consultation under grid A. It all depends on the needs of the child, and usually teams are heavily dependent on the administrator for the district to fill this page out in a way that everyone understands. So very seldom does a parent or even a teacher fill the service delivery page out. In most cases, it's the team chairperson for this particular team because of a lot of the logistics that have to be plugged in. But again, you're not writing it based on the program that you're in because you don't even know the program that the kid's going to be in yet. Legally, the kid's moving to Iowa tomorrow, and the same service delivery would be provided to him or her in Iowa as they would receive wherever they're attending school now. I don't know if that helps you conceptualize, how to write this, but it's a complicated page. It's a very important page. And anything that's here, the student is owed, and if there's a vacancy with OT or a vacancy with speech and language, those things happen. And frankly, if I'm a parent, I'm going to give a district the benefit of the doubt, but you're owed those services. You don't get to, just because you can't fill a vacancy, that doesn't mean my child's right to those services are voided. All right, this is a legally binding document. And so I have to provide compensatory services to make up for time lost. So most districts that have a head on their shoulders, if they end up with, especially these days, there's so many job vacancies and everything. The minute I fill that vacancy, I'm going to talk to the parents about how we're going to make up for the time that was lost. And that's very challenging. Schools are really under the gun these days, and I empathize with that greatly. And I would encourage parents to be sensitive to that, but not at the cost of your child's services. The reality is districts are accountable for providing all of these services, whether they have vacancies or not. And it's a really hard place to be. Does that make sense to everybody?
A couple questions about the grid, Ed, if that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So first of all, how specific can we as parents be about the type of personnel? This question came in the chat. For example, if we want a reading specialist who's trained in OG, for example, right?
Yes,
Or
you can absolutely request that. Absolutely.
do we have a legal right, though, to not require?
It's still a
but
team decision.
uh-huh.
It's still a team decision. So as a parent, you can voice your concern. You can say, what I want is a speech and language person trained in Orton Gillingham, for example, or Linda Mood Bell, or whatever, or a literacy specialist that is trained this way. You can talk about those kind of qualifications. That's totally within your right as a parent. It doesn't mean the majority of the team will agree. And if they disagree, it's possible that the IEP that you receive will not have everything that you requested or asked for. You still have a right at the end to say, I am rejecting this part of the IEP because I want these qualifications. And then you go through a whole nother process. But it is totally within a parent's right to talk about the qualifications of the teachers, of the related services person, or of any paras or anything like. It's all about the needs of the child. It's not about what the district has or doesn't have. It's about what my child needs for his or her speech and language, for her communication skills, for her mobility skills, for her academic achievement, whatever it might be, her social emotional needs. Doesn't mean everyone agrees, but that's part of the team process.
Okay. Second question related to the grid. How specific can we as parents be in terms of getting information of when pullout services will be provided? So, so that we know which gen ed class they might be missing to get pulled out for speech or pulled out.
Oh,
for
that's a really tough one. So,
I know.
So if you have something like that you say you don't want your child pulled out of ELA, as an example, or math, I mean, if a child is receiving related services, it's supposed to be contributing to something about what he or she is not making progress in. So there's some give and take there. That's part of it. The other part of it is under additional information, you can state, any provisions that, might need to be added. So page 8 of the template allows you to add in anything that didn't fit in the rest of the template. And that might be an example where if you feel really strongly, you can say under additional information, I want it documented that his or her pullout services will not interfere with X or Y. And if the team agrees to that and it's in the IEP, well, now you're legally bound for that. If the team doesn't agree with that, again, you have the right to dispute it, but it's still a team decision. It's not an individual decision.
And one last grid question, Ed. What can we do if the district doesn't provide the services as outlined in the grid?
Oh, God.
That never happens.
Well, I mean, it's what I was saying before. I really feel like school district, legally, there's no excuse. Legally, the parent is always in the right if the services are not being provided. As a parent, I would suggest that until you have no reason to give benefit of the doubt, that you give, so if someone gives 2 weeks notice for a speech and language position, for example, and now there's a vacancy, well, they're not going to fill that vacancy in 2 weeks. It might take them 3 months. And that's not necessarily their fault. They could be doing everything they possibly can. There just aren't the bodies out there who are willing to work, Now, that's not your problem as a parent. That's the district's problem. And if they have to outsource those services or do whatever they have to do, that's what they're legally obligated to do. I would just encourage a certain amount of give and take. So if it took a month to fill a vacancy, the district should be reaching out about how they're going to compensate for that month. And now they're doubling up services until those services are made up. Now, I would want to give a district that kind of benefit of the doubt. But if I've been burned by giving them benefit of the doubt, then they don't give me the compensatory services down the road. Well, now you have every right to play hardball, and you can just complain that to the BSEA that services weren't provided. That's the right of the parent as much as it's a right of the district. In other words, if a parent holds a kid out of school and the district really believes that their rights under special ed are being violated because the student is being held out of school, the district has every right to complain to the BSEA as well. It's a partnership. Now, it goes the other way much more often. So in the example that you're talking about, if a district isn't providing a service on the service delivery grid, legally, they're obligated, whether they have vacancies or problems or staffing issues, whatever it might be. The law doesn't acknowledge the district's challenges. It's a legally binding contract. It's a rotten position to be in if you're a district. It's a really hard place to be. Does that all make sense? We could spend an hour and a half just on this page. I mean, this is a nightmare page. But let me get through the logistics so we have enough. The next 3 pages are relatively quick because they talk about a lot of logistical stuff. So page 6, you have to say why you are removing a child from Gen Ed. You can't just do it. You can't say, something like it's in the child's best interest. No, that's not good enough. You have to say, is the child a threat to the learning of other kids in the class? Is it better so say a child has articulation therapy needs. Well, the background noise in a gen ed classroom isn't conducive to doing articulation therapy, and it's in that child's best interest to be removed from the 4th grade class when they have articulation therapy. So you have to briefly explain the rationale for why you're removing a kid from his age-appropriate peers and curriculum. So if it's a 4th grader, why are you taking the kid out of 4th grade? If it's 10th grader, why is the kid being removed from 10th grade? Now, in some cases, it may be very obvious. In other cases, it may be more vague, but you can't just do it without a justification. So that's what this section is all about. Schedule modification is whether or not you need to shorten or lengthen the typical schedule. So the norm is whatever the age-appropriate peer is participating in, which is 180 days for X amount of hours per day and we have laws about time on learning. At the elementary level, you have to have 900 hours. At the secondary level, you have to have 990 hours of direct teaching time per year. So 180 days isn't random. It's about having enough time on learning. So if I need more, because my son or daughter, if they take the whole summer off without any instruction, he or she is going to regress so badly that they're not going to catch up again in September. We refer to that as substantial regression. If my child is vulnerable to substantial regression, in other words, I'm not going to catch up with all the other fourth graders with what we left off with in third grade. So because of that substantial regression, I need a summer service like this. And you describe what that is. So if I need a longer year because of substantial regression, I have to click yes, longer year, and then say what that means in terms of the characteristics of the service. You're not identifying the district summer program. You don't know the program yet. Again, the student's moving to Iowa, next week. We don't, the Kennedy Elementary School summer program isn't in Iowa. All right. That's not how you define the services that are required. You define the characteristics. He or she needs 4 hours of ELA tutoring once a week for 8 weeks during the summer. He or she needs a full-time program for 6 weeks minimum during the summer. Things like that are how a longer year are defined. Now, shorter would be someone, maybe someone's really emotionally stressed and they can't manage a whole day yet or a whole week. Or maybe someone has a physical challenge and they don't have the physical stamina to remain in school a whole day or a whole week. Those would be examples of shortening the day or shortening the year. A team can do anything they want that is in the best interest of the child. So the most common use of this is extending the school year for people who are more severely challenged due to substantial regression. That's the most common thing you see here. But for many kids, it's just blank because you're doing the 180 days and the 990 hours just like every other 10th grader. Transportation services are only for kids who aren't doing the yellow school bus like all the other kids. So if for whatever reason, my access to specialized instruction, related services or supports and aids, which is what I'm eligible for, if I'm eligible for special ed, if I can't access that because I can't get to school, because I can't take the yellow school bus like all the other fourth graders, then you have a right to request transportation services. It's a related service under the law, and in Massachusetts, they highlight it in the IEP document because frankly, it's an expensive service and it makes it easier for districts to figure out, who needs transportation and who doesn't. So this page is really about logistics, justifying if I'm being pulled out of my fourth grade class, justifying if I need a shorter, longer day or year, and justifying if I need transportation different than my age-appropriate peers, or I always refer to it as the yellow school bus. Any questions on page 6? Okay. Page 7, I always joke with my students, this is everyone's favorite page, let's talk about MCAS. So you can participate. Students with special needs do not have a choice as to whether or not they participate in MCAS. It's how they participate. And it doesn't matter how severely challenged you are. You essentially have 3 options. You can participate in MCAS like all the other fourth graders. That's column 1. I can participate in MCAS with accommodations that are defined in my IEP or my 504 plan. That's column 2. Or if I'm two or more grade levels behind my age appropriate peers, and I need to do an MCAS alt portfolio, now I'm in column 3. And this only applies to students who are in age appropriately grade 3 to grade 10. Stupid me teaching the IEP. My first year at Bridgewater, I let people pick the grade level. Everyone picked preschool and grade 12 because they didn't have to do page 7. How stupid was I, right? So then I had to adjust the assignment. No, you have to show me that you know how to do this page. Right. So for each of the curriculum framework areas that are tested, you have to identify how the student is participating in MCAS. So it's possible someone is doing MCAS like all the other fourth graders for ELA, science, and history. But when I get to math, oh boy, I got some challenges in math and I need some accommodation. So now I check off box 2 for math. So this is decided curriculum area by curriculum area based on your grade level and what the testing schedule is for that upcoming IEP year. For anyone who's really severely involved, it's, column 3, write down the, all 4 curriculum areas, and then you have to identify the learning standards that are being measured that year. So this is not a hard page to fill out. It should be very consistent with the accommodations or modifications on PLEP A and PLEP B. Lastly, this is my favorite page. So additional information essentially allows me to include anything that didn't fit in the rest of the document. So one of the standard things districts do now, every team has to identify whether or not the student is vulnerable to bullying. And most districts use additional information to identify that you've had that discussion. And if a student is vulnerable to bullying, what you're going to do about it. You have to have an action plan for what you're going to do about it. So that law came into effect in 2011. So now teams have to decide whether or not a child is vulnerable to bullying, and if so, what they're going to do about it. Most of that information is usually included under additional information. Sometimes students have a behavioral plan, a healthcare plan. They have a particular need for assistive technology or one-on-one support. Anything like that, I'm going to include under additional information so there's no ambiguity about what the people in Iowa should be doing. Again, I'm not writing this for the district the kid is in. I'm writing it based on the child's needs. Anything related to transition. If the kid is moving, you may have recommendations for what needs to be done prior to the move, meaning I'm literally moving from one district to another. So before the kid moves, we want to make sure this, and this happens. Something like that can be included under additional information. And then the response, so once you get this document, you have 3 options as a parent. You can accept it whole hog the way it is. You can reject it whole hog, although that's pretty rare these days. What's nice about the new template is now you can say, I accept everything except this part of the IEP, and I'm rejecting this section. So everything else about the IEP moves forward, but the part that you're disputing, now you have to stop, and the team can't go forward with whatever that disputed area is until that dispute is resolved. So if you reject an IEP or reject a portion of the IEP, the DESE gets notification. And essentially, you're required to participate in a mediation process. Sometimes the state will send out a mediator. Sometimes that's not necessary. It depends. It's a team-by-team decision. But the more stressful and the more disagreement, the more you kind of follow the legal process. So if mediation doesn't work, then we move on to higher levels of resolution, and it can end up in a Bureau of Special Education Appeals hearing in the most extreme cases. So as a parent, you have a right, no matter what you agreed to during the team meeting, you still have a legal right to reject anything you want after the fact. I would say that's not a parent acting in good faith. And as a district, I'm going to be very weary of that parent in the future. However, legally, that's totally within your rights, especially if you thought you understood something and then you read it in black and white. And now it's like, uh-oh, that's not what I meant. So if that's a good example where you reject this portion. And again, most reasonable districts will reach out to the parent. They'll try and get clarification about what the concern is. They try and get to some agreed upon resolution, and the IEP moves forward with the corrections. In more extreme cases, you have to go through mediation and a potential hearing. So that's the template. There are other pieces. We didn't talk about the transition planning form and the elements of that for kids who are 14 to 22. For any of those students, all the elements of the transition planning form are supposed to be embedded within the context of the IEP itself. So that's an important page. If I have a student who's especially severely challenged from 14 to 22, but more moderately challenged between 16 and 18, I still have to address transition planning, even if my child is mildly challenged. So those are elements we haven't really talked about, but would be important depending on the age. If I have a 3-year-old entering, the system for the first time, that's a whole nother process. Usually more severely challenged people, are identified as 3-year-olds. So this can vary a lot. I'm going to stop my share at this point.
Ed, we have a couple questions that, I think we have a couple minutes. Do you mind if I ask?
No, I'll stay as long as people want to stay.
Okay. So both of the questions are related to data collection.
Yeah.
So one of them is when goals and benchmarks are written into an IEP, it doesn't specify when and how educators are collecting that data, right? So are they collecting data daily, weekly, monthly, so on? So it might say, and I know you hate percentages, but it might say 80%, but how often are they collecting the data to come up with?
To clarify, I don't like the misuse of percentages. If you know that a person is at 40% accuracy and your goal is to get to 60%, that's an appropriate use of percentages. But if it's a blanket 75% accuracy, no matter what the goal is, that's what I object to. So the issue is, how do I know how they're keeping data on that accuracy? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, and how do we because schools are not required to necessarily disclose that information to us, but we can ask, right? And say,
yeah,
how often are you collecting data and how do you do it?
That's also, if you're really concerned about it, that's one of those things you can put under additional information. You can say, I would like to have an update, on a more frequent basis than at the end of each quarter. And as long as the team agrees, then now that's part of the service delivery. I mean, most, if I'm a smart school district, Ed's opinion now, all right, this is Ed's opinion. If I'm a smart school district and I know a parent is concerned about the rate of progress, I mean, if I'm a good teacher and I'm doing my job, I'm not afraid to share how your son or daughter is doing on a weekly basis. And can I share my data sheets? I don't know why I was never afraid to do that as a teacher, but that there is no legal right to access that information. You have a legal right to know quarterly how much progress is being made on the goal. And that should be specific. So at least as often as kids get report cards, you should know how much progress is being made toward the goal in a way that you can understand. It shouldn't be something that you read it and it's like, I have no idea what this means. That's not okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, because you just answered the second question already there too, so that's really helpful. A really good question in the chat just now too about, I think this person may have misunderstood what you said, but maybe I misunderstood. The comment in the chat says, I heard you say, Ed, that it's not really good faith to reject after the fact unless you didn't understand. But what if you can't reach agreement about something in the session? You've mentioned majority, but as you know, parents are usually.
Oh, yeah. Then the parent has every right to reject.
That's what I heard you say.
Yeah, that's, I mean,
that's
if I'm the school district, I'm probably anticipating it. Yeah, I mean, and again, I might reach out to try and get to some other compromise before, because once you reject an IEP, again, the DESE is notified, and that puts everything on a different level in terms of the district scrutiny. So no district wants an IEP rejected. But do you have the legal right to reject something that you don't agree with? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think parents don't use the rejection, honestly, sometimes enough. They don't realize they can reject like one little thing or one.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really big, I mean, back when I was a teacher, if you rejected one sentence, the whole IEP got rejected. You had to start all over again from scratch. So now it's so much better. You're able to move forward with everything else on the IEP except the part that's being rejected.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if that's a point of clarification, sometimes it can be fixed over the phone. And you just rewrite the document the way that you're both agreeing to, and so be it. Sometimes it's that easy, and sometimes you go to mediation. It all depends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. And then a question about EPP, Ed, and I don't know much about EPP, but if students have an EPP in the MCAS, can they have an intervention plan?
Tell me what they mean by EEP.
It's Melissa, it's EPP.
EP, no, yeah. Did I mispronounce EPP, the Educational Proficiency Plan, Ed? Do you know much about that?
I always have to look some of this stuff up, so I don't want to mess it up. So I'm going to pass on that one because I have to look it up to make sure I was being accurate about reflecting the expectations of that.
Yeah, I don't know enough about it either, but I know we've got some other educators in the room. So if you want to respond to that in the chat, feel free. If any of you think you know something that we don't know, because yeah, I don't know enough about it either as faculty to comment on that either. Okay. The last question is, what if we get an outside evaluation, like a private neuropsych, Ed, and it conflicts with the student's report card, and the school team is saying, well, that's not what we're seeing in school. What can we do?
Well, that's the district's right. So you have a right to seek an outside evaluation. The district doesn't have to pay for that unless you take the district to court and the court sides with the family. Now the district has to pay for all of that. But if you seek an outside evaluation and the district disagrees, that's totally within their rights based on their personnel and what they observe, how they've evaluated the child. No, they have a right to their opinion just as much as you have a right to your opinion. So sometimes that stuff gets resolved through mediation, sometimes court, sometimes through a phone call.
Hopefully a phone call.
Well, hopefully a phone call for both sides, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
yeah.
Parents bear the burden of legal fees if they lose. So the law got changed. It used to be school districts had to pay the legal fees no matter what. And, you know, you had hearings all over the place. Then they changed the law. And if a school district loses, now they have to pay the legal fees for both sides. But if a parent loses, now they have to pay their own legal fees. They don't pay the schools, but they're responsible for their own legal fees. So that really drove down. So what I would tell a parent, and this is maybe a little slimy on my part as a teacher and someone who represents schools, but if I really felt like a school district was being abusive to a parent or playing on their lack of understanding of the system, I would encourage the family to connect with the Federation for Children with Special Needs. That's an organization specifically designed to assist parents in understanding their rights under special ed law, and in particular around the IEP. Now, some of the advocates who work for the Federation are awesome, and they're reasonable, and then there are some advocates who are what I call saber rattlers. You know, they make a lot of loud noise, but they don't know what they're talking about. And they're people who don't really facilitate the process. But generally speaking, I would say the Federation, you know, people like Julie Landau, a lot of lawyers track the Federation website because they're so in tune with what rights are, and they're so accurate about those things. So you know, if a parent really feels like they need support, you know, and especially if they can't afford it, the Federation for Children is a really good resource. They have a really good website, and they're about the process. They're clearly about supporting parents, but they're not naive to the challenges that districts are facing in trying to implement an individualized, you know, right in a collective fashion. You know, we don't run schools so every kid has their own school, but every program is its own program. So it's challenging. It's challenging if you're on the school side of things. So to me, that's the safety valve for anyone who really needs more support than what they're able to afford.
Thank you so much, Ed, for your time. I want to be respectful of your time and everybody else's time too. And also past 8:30 is past my bedtime. So thank you. And my husband's on, and you can see him nodding because I'm like telling you the legit truth. So I really appreciate everybody being here on behalf of Christy from the East Bridgewater CPAC and me from Inclusion Matters, my board members who are here tonight too. Thank you all so much for coming out. You can check out our website for our upcoming events, and we hope to see you again. Thank you all.
Good luck, everybody.
Thank you again, Ed. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no problem. Is there anything?
No, thank you.
Follow up you want or anything?
No, I will make.
If you think of anything, just
Sorry,
don't
Nikki, I
hesitate.
can unmute you. Want me to unmute you? Hold on. There you go. You can unmute.
I was just gonna say hello to you guys and to Dr. Carter. It's been
How you doing, Nikki?
Good. How are you?